Imagine sailing across a frozen ocean, weeks of darkness behind you. Ahead, an island no European had ever claimed. When the Vikings arrived in Greenland over 1,000 years ago, they did something extraordinary. They built farms, churches, entire villages. For nearly 500 years, thousands of Norse settlers lived at the edge of the known world. And then, they vanished. No battlefields, no mass graves, no clear record of what happened. Just empty farms, silent churches, and abandoned stone houses slowly swallowed by the Arctic wind. What happened to the lost Vikings of Greenland? And why are new scientific discoveries now revealing clues that could finally solve one of history's strangest disappearances? The arrival of the Vikings. The story begins around 985 AD. A Viking explorer named Erik the Red was exiled from Iceland for murder. Instead of disappearing into history, he sailed west. What he found was a vast, icy land. But Erik was clever. He knew settlers would never come to a place called Frozen Hell. So he gave it a new name, Greenland, a name that promised fertile land and opportunity. And it worked. Soon, hundreds of Norse settlers followed him. They built two main colonies along Greenland's southwest coast, the Eastern Settlement and the Western Settlement. At their peak, these colonies held around 2,500 people. For medieval Europe, this was an extraordinary achievement, a thriving Viking society thousands of kilometers from home. Life at the edge of the world. Life in Greenland was brutal. Winters were long. The growing season was short. But the Vikings adapted. They raised cattle, sheep, and goats. They hunted seals. They traded valuable goods like walrus ivory with Europe. Archaeologists have discovered stone churches, farmhouses, blacksmith workshops, and even Christian burial grounds. This wasn't a temporary camp. This was a permanent civilization. But despite their determination, Greenland was never an easy place to survive. The first signs of trouble. By the 1300s, something began to change. The climate started shifting. Temperatures slowly dropped across the North Atlantic. Historians call this period the Little Ice Age. Sea ice expanded, storms grew stronger, and sailing between Greenland and Europe became more dangerous. Trade ships arrived less often, supplies became scarce, and Greenland's isolation grew deeper every year. A fragile economy. The Viking colony depended heavily on trade. Greenland exported one valuable resource, walrus ivory. In medieval Europe, ivory was a luxury. It was used for religious carvings, chess pieces, jewelry, and decorations. For centuries, Greenland's walrus hunters supplied Europe with this rare material. But by the 1300s, something unexpected happened. European markets were flooded with African elephant ivory. It was cheaper, more abundant, and suddenly, Greenland's most important export became almost worthless. Without trade, the colony began to weaken.
Don't forget to like and subscribe for more.
Environmental pressure. Greenland's environment was fragile. The Vikings brought European farming techniques with them. They grazed sheep and cattle. They cut the few available trees for firewood. Over time, this caused soil erosion and reduced farmland. As conditions worsened, farming became more difficult. Food shortages became more common. Archaeological studies show something fascinating. At first, the Vikings relied mostly on livestock, but over time, their diet changed dramatically. By the final centuries of the colony, Up to 80% of their food came from the sea, especially seals. They were adapting, but it may not have been enough. A changing climate. For decades, historians believed that cold temperatures alone destroyed the colony. But newer research paints a more complicated picture. Scientists studying ancient lake sediments discovered something surprising. The biggest problem may not have been cold, but drought. Less rainfall meant less grass. Less grass meant less hay. And hay was essential to feed livestock through the long Arctic winters. Without enough hay, cattle died. Sheep starved. Farms collapsed. Slowly, the Viking agricultural system began to break down. Rising seas and flooded farms. Recent geological studies reveal another unexpected problem. Sea levels around southwestern Greenland may have risen significantly during the Viking era. This flooding could have swallowed large sections of farmland near the coast. For a society already struggling with limited resources, losing fertile land was devastating. Entire farms may have become unusable. Communities were forced to abandon their homes. Isolation from the world. Meanwhile, Europe itself was changing. In the mid-1300s, the Black Death devastated the continent. Trade networks collapsed, shipping routes changed. For Greenland, this was catastrophic. Ships that once arrived every few years simply stopped coming. Without iron, timber, and tools from Europe, the colony's technology slowly decayed, and Greenland became one of the most isolated societies on Earth. The disappearance. The Western settlement was the first to disappear. By the late 1300s, it was completely abandoned. No clear record explains what happened. The Eastern settlement lasted longer, but by around 1450, it too fell silent. When European sailors returned generations later, they found nothing. Empty farms, ruined churches, and grazing land reclaimed by wilderness. The Viking colony of Greenland had completely vanished. A mystery without an ending. And here's the strangest part. Archaeologists found no evidence of mass death, no battlefields, no widespread violence. The settlers simply disappeared. Some historians believe they starved. Others think they migrated back to Iceland or Norway. Another theory suggests they may have joined the Inuit people, who lived in Greenland and had mastered survival in the Arctic. But there is still no definitive answer. Even today, the fate of the Greenland Vikings remains one of history's greatest unsolved mysteries. Encounters with another civilization. When the Vikings arrived in Greenland, they believed they were alone, but they weren't. Long before the Norse ships appeared on the horizon, another people had already mastered survival in the Arctic, the Inuit. The Inuit lived very differently from the Vikings. While Norse settlers relied on farms and livestock, the Inuit depended almost entirely on hunting. They built lightweight homes. They traveled using dog sleds. They hunted seals, whales, and fish with incredible efficiency. In a land where farming could fail overnight, the Inuit way of life was far more adaptable. For years, historians wondered, did the Vikings and the Inuit ever meet? The answer appears to be yes. Evidence of contact. Archaeologists have found strange clues across Greenland. In some Inuit settlements, researchers discovered Norse metal tools. These tools were clearly made using European techniques, but they appeared in communities far from Viking farms. This suggests something fascinating. The two cultures may have traded with each other,
or perhaps they encountered one another during hunting expeditions along the coast. Old Norse writings even describe mysterious people called Skraelings. Most historians believe this word referred to the Inuit, but these texts give very little detail. Were the meetings peaceful or violent? No one knows for sure. But one thing is clear: the Vikings were no longer alone in Greenland.
The strained silence of history. One of the most puzzling aspects of the Greenland mystery is the lack of written records. The Vikings were not a silent culture. In Iceland and Norway, Norse history was carefully recorded in the famous Icelandic sagas. These sagas tell stories of voyages, battles, kings, and exploration. They even describe journeys to North America. But when it comes to the end of the Greenland colonies, the records suddenly go quiet. No dramatic final battle, no story of famine, no tragic account of the last survivors. Just silence. It's as if the colony slowly faded from memory. A church frozen in time. One of the most haunting discoveries in Greenland lies in the ruins of a small stone church. Today it is known as Hvalsey Church. It is one of the best preserved Viking buildings in the entire Arctic, and it holds an important clue. In the year 1408, a wedding was held here. A Norse man and woman were married in this small Greenland church. The event was carefully recorded in Icelandic documents. It is the last confirmed written record of the Viking colony. After that, nothing. No letters, no reports, no messages from Greenland ever reached Europe again. The people simply disappeared from history. The last ships. For centuries, historians imagined a tragic scenario. Perhaps the final Viking ships left Greenland filled with desperate settlers escaping the cold. But recent archaeological studies suggest something very different. There is almost no evidence that large numbers of people ever returned to Iceland or Norway. If thousands of settlers had suddenly arrived, records would exist. But they don't, which raises an eerie possibility. Maybe most of them never left Greenland at all. A harsh adaptation. One theory suggests the Vikings attempted to adapt to the Arctic lifestyle. Over time, their diet shifted heavily toward marine hunting. Seal bones dominate the final archaeological layers of Viking settlements. But there is a mystery here, too. Despite living beside the sea for centuries, the Norse never fully adopted Inuit technologies. They rarely used kayaks. They did not widely use harpoons designed for Arctic hunting, and they did not build the flexible hunting camps used by Inuit communities. Why? Historians believe culture may have played a role. The Vikings saw themselves as European farmers. Adopting Inuit methods may have felt like abandoning their identity, and that decision may have sealed their fate. New discoveries from ice and soil. In recent years, modern science has begun revealing new clues. Researchers studying ancient DNA, pollen, and lake sediments are reconstructing the Viking environment in incredible detail. And what they're discovering is surprising. Greenland during the Viking era may have experienced rapid environmental shifts. Some years were relatively mild. Others brought sudden droughts, colder temperatures, or failed harvests. These unpredictable changes made survival extremely difficult. Imagine raising cattle in a place where one bad winter could wipe out your entire herd. For the Greenland settlers, that reality was constant. The walrus hunters. Another fascinating discovery involves the Vikings' ivory trade. For centuries, Europe imported walrus ivory from Greenland.
Recent scientific studies analyzed ancient ivory artifacts found in medieval European cities. The results were shocking. Many of these artifacts came directly from Greenland walruses. This means Greenland's hunters were supplying luxury goods to the entire continent. But when demand collapsed, so did the colony's economy. Without ivory trade, Greenland lost its most important connection to Europe. A colony at the edge of survival. Imagine life in the final years of the settlement. Winter storms grow longer. Ships from Europe stop arriving. Food becomes unpredictable. The population slowly shrinks. Young people may leave. Farms are abandoned one by one. Churches fall silent. Eventually, entire valleys once filled with Norse farms become empty, not through sudden disaster, but through slow collapse. A civilization quietly fading away. The Inuit theory. Some historians believe the final Vikings may have merged with the Inuit. Over generations, survivors could have joined nearby Arctic communities, learning their hunting methods, adopting their lifestyle, and slowly losing their Norse identity. If this happened, the descendants of the Vikings might have survived long after the colony vanished. But proving this theory is very difficult. Centuries have passed, and cultural traces may have completely disappeared. The mystery that still remains. Despite decades of research, no single explanation solves the mystery completely. Instead, historians now believe the collapse was caused by multiple factors working together. Climate change, economic collapse, isolation, environmental damage, cultural resistance to adaptation. Each problem alone might not have destroyed the colony, but combined, they created a perfect storm, a slow, relentless pressure that the Greenland Vikings could not escape. The search for the final Viking settlement. For centuries, historians believed they already knew where the Viking colonies of Greenland were located. Two main regions were identified: the eastern settlement in southern Greenland and the western settlement located hundreds of kilometers farther north. Although the name Eastern Settlement actually was the largest Viking community in Greenland. At its peak, it may have supported several thousand settlers, with farms spread across the fjords. But the Western Settlement tells a darker story. By the mid-1300s, it was already abandoned. According to a chilling report written by the Norwegian priest Ivar Barderson, the Western Settlement had completely vanished when he visited. He described empty farms, abandoned buildings, and livestock wandering wild across the fields. There were no signs of violence, no burned houses, no tragic account of the last survivors. Just silence. It's as if the colony slowly faded from memory. A new discovery beneath the ice. Greenland is changing. As global temperatures slowly rise, glaciers that have covered the land for centuries are beginning to retreat. And beneath that melting ice, ancient secrets are emerging. In recent years, scientists using satellite imaging and ground-penetrating radar have begun scanning remote regions of southern Greenland. And what they're finding is astonishing. Buried beneath layers of soil and ice, researchers have discovered new Norse farm structures that were previously unknown. Some of these sites suggest that Viking settlements may have extended farther than historians originally believed, which raises a fascinating possibility. The final survivors of the Greenland colony may have moved to smaller, hidden communities deeper inside the fjords, places that were never recorded in medieval documents, places that might still be waiting to be discovered.
The hidden trade routes. Another recent discovery has changed how historians view the Vikings of Greenland. For a long time, Experts believed the colony was almost completely isolated, but new archaeological evidence suggests the settlers were more connected than we once thought. Artifacts found in Greenland include European goods such as iron tools, glass beads, church objects, and even fragments of imported textiles. These objects prove that ships from Europe continued reaching Greenland for centuries. But something strange happened in the late 1300s. The voyages began to slow, and eventually they stopped completely. Why? Some historians believe the answer lies in the political chaos spreading across Europe at the time. The devastating Black Death wiped out huge portions of the population. Entire trade networks collapsed. Ports closed, and priorities shifted towards survival closer to home. For distant colonies like Greenland, the result was catastrophic. Without regular contact, the settlers were left completely on their own. Climate clues from the ocean. Scientists studying ancient ocean sediments have uncovered another important piece of the puzzle. The Viking era coincided with a relatively warm period known as the medieval warm period. During this time, farming in Greenland was just barely possible. Grass could grow, cattle could graze during the short summers, but around the 14th century, the climate began to change. A colder era known as the Little Ice Age slowly took hold across the North Atlantic. Sea ice expanded. Storms grew stronger. Sailing routes became far more dangerous. For Greenland settlers, this meant ships arrived less often. Food production declined, and winters became far more brutal. The environment itself was turning against them. The mysterious bones. One of the most haunting discoveries in Greenland comes from the final layers of Viking settlements. Archaeologists analyzing ancient garbage piles, known as middens, found something unexpected. In earlier Viking layers, the remains of cattle, sheep, and goats are common. These animals formed the backbone of Norse farming culture. But in the final layers, the bones tell a different story. Seal bones become dominant. In some locations, they make up over 80% of the diet. This suggests the Vikings were slowly abandoning farming and turning toward marine hunting. But unlike the Inuit, they never fully mastered this lifestyle. They lacked the specialized tools and knowledge that Arctic hunters had perfected over thousands of years. Which means the settlers may have been trapped between two worlds, unable to continue farming, but unable to completely transform into Arctic hunters. A mystery still waiting under the ice. Today, much of southern Greenland remains unexplored by archaeologists. Massive glaciers still cover large areas where Viking farms may once have stood. But as the ice continues to retreat, researchers believe new discoveries are inevitable. Hidden buildings, lost tools, even entire settlements. Each new discovery could bring us closer to answering one of history's most haunting questions. What really happened to the last Vikings of Greenland? Did they slowly die out? Did they abandon the colony and return to Europe? Or did they disappear into the Arctic wilderness, leaving only ruins behind? The silence of Greenland. Imagine standing on the coast of southern Greenland today. The wind moves slowly through the grass. Cold waves roll against the rocky shore, and scattered across the landscape, you can still see them, the ruins. Ancient stone walls, collapsed farmhouses, the remains of small churches where Viking settlers once prayed. Over 1,000 years ago, families built their lives here. Children were born here. Animals grazed in these fields. Ships once arrived from Europe carrying news of a distant world. But today, only silence remains.
The people who built this colony, the Norse settlers who crossed the North Atlantic and carved a civilization out of ice and stone, are gone. No final message, no record of their last days, just empty settlements slowly being reclaimed by the Arctic. For centuries, historians searched for a simple explanation. Was it climate? Hunger? Isolation? Conflict? But the truth may be far more complex. The fall of the Greenland Vikings was likely not caused by one disaster. Instead, it may have been a slow unraveling, a chain reaction of small crises. A colder climate, a collapsing trade network, changing ecosystems, and a society struggling to adapt to a world that was becoming harsher every year. In the end, the colony did not fall in a dramatic moment. It faded, farm by farm, village by village, until one day the last Norse family may have looked out across the frozen ocean and realized something terrifying. No ships were coming, no help was on the horizon, and the world they knew was disappearing. Perhaps they left, perhaps they joined other Arctic communities, or perhaps they simply vanished into the vast wilderness of Greenland. Their story reminds us of something powerful. Even the bravest explorers, even the strongest civilizations are not immune to the forces of nature, climate, and time. Yet the mystery of the Greenland Vikings is not completely lost, because every year, as glaciers retreat and archaeologists explore deeper into the Arctic landscape, new clues continue to emerge, buried beneath ice, hidden beneath the soil, waiting for someone to uncover them. And maybe one day, the frozen land of Greenland will finally reveal what happened to the lost Vikings. Until then, their story remains one of the greatest mysteries of the medieval world, a reminder that history still holds secrets, and sometimes the most fascinating chapters are the ones that simply disappear.